You know that moment when your whole world tilts on its axis? When one tiny whispered sentence that wasn't even meant for your ears, reaches into your chest and rearranges everything you thought you knew. I do. Because it happened to me at 2:47 in the morning in a sleeping bag on my best friend's bedroom floor while she thought I was dead asleep. I wasn't. I was lying there with my eyes closed, barely breathing, listening to her talk on the phone in the dark. And what she said. What she asterisk said asterisk. I still hear it sometimes when the house gets too quiet. I still feel the exact way my stomach dropped, the way the air left my lungs, the way something inside me cracked open like a fault line giving way after years of silent pressure. But here's the thing nobody tells you about those kinds of moments. Sometimes what breaks you is also what saves you. This is my story. And I'm going to tell you all of it, every messy, embarrassing, heartbreaking, and ultimately beautiful piece of it, because if you've ever felt invisible to the people who were supposed to see you most, you need to hear this. Let me take you back. Back to a time when everything felt simpler, even though it wasn't really simpler at all. It just looked that way from the outside, and I was very, very good at making things look fine from the outside. Her name was Layla. We had been best friends since the 4th grade, 11 years old, gap-toothed, obsessed with a particular book series about children who discover a magical door in their school library. We'd met in the actual library, both of us reaching for the same book at the same time, both of us too stubborn to let go, and our teacher had looked at us and laughed and said, "I think you two just became best friends whether you like it or not." She was right. Layla was everything I wasn't, at least on the surface. She was loud where I was quiet. She laughed first and thought second. She walked into rooms like she was already certain she belonged there. I walked into rooms scanning for the exits. She collected people the way some kids collect stickers, enthusiastically and without much discrimination, while I was perfectly happy if I had just one person, one real person to sit beside. She was my one person. For 11 years, she was my person. We did everything together. We learned to ride bikes on the same stretch of cracked sidewalk outside my house. We cried through our first period cramps, passing a heating pad back and forth and watching terrible reality TV. We stayed up until 4 in the morning the night before the SATs, quizzing each other on vocabulary words we were both convinced we'd forget the second we sat down in that gymnasium. We held each other through our parents' fights, our first heartbreaks, the death of her cat Felix, the summer my dad lost his job and our family had to move to a smaller apartment, and I was so ashamed I could barely talk about it. She never made me feel ashamed. That was the thing about Layla. Even at her most chaotic, even when she was absolutely spinning out in some drama of her own creation, she had this gift for making you feel like you mattered, like what you were going through was the most important thing in the room. I thought I knew her completely. I thought she knew me. I was wrong on both counts as it turned out, but I wouldn't understand that for a long time. By the time we were 22, things had started to quietly shift between us in ways I couldn't quite name or explain. It was like watching a beloved old photograph slowly fade. You know something is being lost, you can feel it, but you can't see it happening in real time. You only notice when you pick it up one day and realize the colors aren't what they used to be. We had gone to different colleges, me to a state school 2 hours north, her to a private university in another city entirely. We'd promised each other that distance wouldn't matter. We were the kind of friends that distance didn't matter to. We were that asterisk close. And for a while we were. FaceTime calls that lasted until sunrise. Voice memos sent back and forth like letters. A shared notes document where we wrote down things we wanted to tell each other before we forgot, funny overheard conversations, weird dreams, small moments that felt too fragile to lose. We stayed woven into each other's daily lives in 100 invisible ways. But college changes people. That's not a tragedy, it's supposed to. You go away, you collide with new ideas and new people, you shed old skins and grow new ones. The problem is that sometimes, when you come home again, you discover that you and the person you love most have shed your skins in different directions. And the new people you've grown into look at each other across an invisible gap that didn't used to be there. Layla came back from college with a new friend group, a sharper sense of humor, a boyfriend named Dominic who wore expensive sneakers and smiled too much, and a social life that ran at a frequency I couldn't quite tune into. She came back and she was still herself, still laughed the same, still used the same expressions, still reached for my hand when she was scared, but there was something different underneath it all. A new self-consciousness, a new awareness of how she appeared to people. A kind of careful curating of who she let in and who she kept at arm's length. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself that friendships naturally evolve and that the core of what we had was unchanged, even if the texture of our daily lives had shifted. I told myself to stop being so sensitive. I was very good at telling myself things. The truth is, and I can only say this now from the other side of everything, I had been terrified of losing her for years. Maybe since the day we graduated high school and I first understood what different paths really meant. That fear lived in my chest like a small cold stone, and I never talked about it, and I became very skilled at building walls around it so I didn't have to look at it directly. I smiled through the times she canceled plans. I brushed off the text messages that went unanswered for days. When she'd forget things I'd told her, things that mattered to me, that I'd worked up the courage to share, I'd tell myself she was busy, she was dealing with a lot, that the friendship still asterisk counted even if I sometimes felt like a background character in a story that used to be about both of us. I was afraid to ask for more. I was afraid that if I said, "Hey, I feel invisible to you sometimes," she would look at me with that particular kind of gentle pity that means you're too much and I don't know how to give you what you need, and I would lose her for certain, which seemed worse than the slow losing that was already happening. So I stayed quiet. And I kept showing up. And I kept being the friend I'd always been, hopping she'd notice eventually, hopping one day she'd turn around and see me standing there and say, "I see you, I haven't gone anywhere, we're okay." The sleepover was her idea. We hadn't spent a whole night together in almost 2 years, which sounds impossible when I say it out loud. But life has a way of filling up the calendar with things that feel important until suddenly you look up and realize the truly important things have been quietly waiting on a shelf, collecting dust. She called me on a Thursday afternoon, and the sound of her voice was warm and familiar and made the cold stone in my chest feel smaller somehow. "Come stay over this weekend," she said. "Just like old times, I miss you. I feel like we've been ships passing for months." Ships passing, yes, exactly that. "I'll be there Saturday," I said, and I meant it like a promise, like a homecoming. Saturday arrived the way good things do when you've been waiting for them, both slower and faster than expected. I drove to her apartment, which she shared with two roommates who were both conveniently away for the weekend. I brought snacks. I brought the little stuffed elephant she'd given me on my 18th birthday as a joke, because she knew I still slept with it sometimes even though I was a grown adult with a degree and a car payment. I brought all the best parts of myself, carefully arranged, ready to lay them at her feet and say, "Here, this is still me, and here is still us." And it was wonderful for most of the night. We made pasta and ate it directly from the pot, standing in her kitchen in our socks, talking over each other and laughing at things that wouldn't make sense to anyone outside the context of our shared 11-year history. She showed me her new apartment decorations, the macrame wall hanging her aunt had made, the photos she'd printed and stuck to her closet door. Some of them included me. That felt important. I noticed which ones. The way you notice things when you're quietly terrified. We watched 3 episodes of a show we both loved, and she fell asleep against my shoulder somewhere in the middle of the second one, and I sat very still for a long time, not wanting to wake her, thinking this is it, this is the thing, this is why I don't let go. We moved to her room around midnight. She set up a sleeping bag on the floor for me, the same one we'd used for years, faded blue nylon with a pattern of cartoon stars. I hadn't outgrown sleeping bags, I hadn't outgrown any of this. We talked in the dark for a while about our jobs, about her relationship with Dominic, which was apparently more complicated than she'd been letting on, about a family thing I was dealing with, about our dreams and our fears, and all the things that live in the space between midnight and sleep when your guard comes down and you stop performing and just asterisk talk. It felt like being 22 and 14 and 11 all at once. It felt like coming home. At some point I drifted off. Or I almost drifted off. I was in that strange in-between place, not quite asleep but not fully awake, my breathing slow and even, my body heavy and still, when I heard her phone buzz on her nightstand. I heard the soft shuffle of her picking it up. I heard her voice barely above a whisper. "Hey, yeah, sorry, I know it's late." A pause. "She's here, she's asleep." I stayed very still. I don't know why I didn't say anything. Maybe I was too deep in that half-sleep to surface quickly. Maybe some instinct told me to wait. Maybe I knew, somewhere under the conscious, that what came next would be important. She moved. I heard the soft creak of her bed, then careful footsteps, then the almost silent closing of her bedroom door, but it didn't close all the way, an inch or two of space. And through that inch or two, her voice, still low but clear enough. No, it's fine, I'm glad she's here, I don't know, she's a lot sometimes, like I love her so much, but sometimes she's just a lot. My stomach turned to stone. She needs so much from me, like emotionally, and I feel so guilty saying that because she never asks for anything, she never actually says what she needs, but I can just feel it. You know that weight, that pressure, like I'm always supposed to be this thing for her person, her whole person, and I don't know how to be that anymore. My eyes were open now, staring at the ceiling. I wasn't asleep, I wasn't anything. I feel terrible even thinking this, but sometimes I wonder if she's holding me back. Like if I'd have grown more, changed more if she wasn't still so, I don't know, rooted. Like she's rooted to who we were when we were kids and she wants me to stay there with her and I can't asterisk. I'm not that person anymore. A long pause, her voice got quieter. Yeah, I know, I do love her, I'm not saying I don't. I'm just saying sometimes love isn't enough, Sometimes you outgrow people even when you love them, and I don't know what to do with that. And then she laughed, softly, like it was something small. She still brought her stuffed elephant, Dom. She's 22 and she still sleeps with a stuffed elephant. And she laughed again. I closed my eyes. I didn't cry. I don't know why I didn't cry right then. I think maybe I was in shock, the kind that comes before pain, the calm center of a storm. I lay there on that faded blue sleeping bag with its cartoon stars and I breathed very carefully, very deliberately in and out, while my best friend of 11 years stood behind a half-closed door and wondered out loud if I was something she had outgrown. She came back and a few minutes later, got into bed, said my name softly, checking. I didn't answer, I kept my breathing slow and measured. Good night, she whispered, to the room or to me, I'm not sure. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. I left early. I told her I had a thing I'd forgotten about, a commitment vague enough to be plausible. I watched her face carefully while I said it, looking for guilt, for awareness, for some flicker of I know what I said last night. There was nothing, just a sleepy hug and I'm so glad you came, a genuine warmth that made everything more confusing. She meant it, she genuinely missed me, she genuinely loved me. And she also said those things. Both of those things were true at the same time, and I couldn't figure out what to do with that. I drove home with the stuffed elephant on the passenger seat beside me, which suddenly felt less funny than it ever had before, and I thought about the word she'd used. Rooted. She said I was rooted, like it was a bad thing, like being rooted to who you were, being rooted to the people you love, to the version of yourself that still knows how to need someone, like that was a flaw, a limitation, something that held other people back. I thought about that for a long time. And then I cried. I pulled into a gas station 2 blocks from my apartment and I sat in my car and I cried the way you cry when you've been holding something for years without realizing it. The ugly, full-body kind that feels less like sadness and more like excavation. Like something is being dug out of you, something that had grown roots of its own. I cried for the friendship I'd been slowly losing and pretending not to see. I cried for every canceled plan I'd absorbed without complaint. Every unreturned message I'd dismissed with excuses. Every time I'd made myself smaller, quieter, less a lot because I was afraid that the full size of me was too much to hold. I cried because she wasn't entirely wrong. I hadn't grown as much as I should have. I had been holding on white-knuckled to something that was changing whether I held on or not. I had been so afraid of losing her that I'd made myself into a kind of anchor, not on purpose, not consciously, but in all the invisible ways fear shapes you. And I cried because love really isn't always enough. I'd known that intellectually. I'd even said it to other people, given that advice freely, with confidence. But knowing something in theory and having someone say it about you, about your love, your need, your very particular and specific way of loving, are completely different experiences. The truth, when it's about you, lands differently. It always does. Here is what I did not do. I did not text her immediately. I did not call her up and say, I heard you. I did not send a long, carefully worded message explaining my feelings. I did not show up at her door with everything laid out in neat sentences prepared for a confrontation. I'm not a confrontational person. I never have been. Part of that is personality, the part that came with me, the part that probably contributed to everything she'd said on that phone call. Part of it is something I'd learned, that showing the full weight of your feelings can feel dangerous when you're afraid of what it will cost you. So I did what I always did. I went quiet. But this time the quiet was different. Before, my quiet had been protective, a way of keeping the peace, keeping her close, keeping everything from falling apart. This new quiet was something else. It was the quiet of someone who has just been handed a mirror and is standing very still, staring into it, trying to understand what they're actually seeing. I needed to think. So I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I thought, I want to be honest with you because I think that's the only reason to tell a story like this. My first instinct in the days that followed was to be angry. Not the explosive kind of anger, that's never really been my style. The slow-burning kind. The kind that lives underneath the surface of everything and colors the way you see the world without you fully realizing it's there. I replayed what she'd said 100 times, turning it over in my mind, examining it from every angle, and in those early days I mostly saw its sharpest edges. She said I was asterisk a lot. She said I was holding her back. She laughed at my stuffed elephant. She talked about me to her boyfriend like I was a burden she'd been silently carrying, like our friendship was something she endured rather than chose. I was furious. And underneath the fury, devastated. Those two things coexisted as they usually do when someone you love hurts you, rage and grief, twins sharing a face. But then, and I don't know exactly when or how the shift happened, I started to hear the other parts of what she'd said. I love her so much. I feel so guilty. I don't know what to do with that. She wasn't triumphant, she wasn't cold, she wasn't talking about me the way someone talks about a person they've already dismissed, she was asterisk struggling. She was carrying something she didn't know how to put down. She was trying to articulate something that scared her, the possibility that love and belonging can pull against each other, that caring deeply for someone doesn't automatically mean knowing how to be what they need. I heard someone trying to figure out something hard. And when I let myself sit with that, when I stopped just hearing the parts that hurt me and started hearing all of it, something complicated happened. I recognized myself in her. Because here's the thing, I had never told Layla what I needed. Not really. I'd spent 11 years being the low-maintenance friend, the understanding one, the one who didn't make demands because I was so afraid of being too much that I'd become, paradoxically, a silent presence in my own friendship. I'd never said hey, when you cancel plans without rescheduling, I feel like an afterthought. I'd never said I miss you, and not just in a sweet way, in an aching, something is wrong way. I'd never said I need you to tell me sometimes that I matter to you because the silence makes me spiral. I'd never said any of that. I'd swallowed it all and smiled and waited for her to notice on her own, which is, I realized slowly, an unfair thing to do to someone. It's a kind of emotional debt that accumulates invisibly. She never knew how much I was carrying. She never knew I was carrying anything because I'd worked so hard to make sure she didn't see it. And then I blamed her for not seeing it. That's a hard thing to admit. It's the kind of thing that makes you sit very still in a quiet room for a while, just breathing. She wasn't entirely wrong, and I wasn't entirely blameless, and the situation wasn't entirely fixable, and that is just the most human kind of mess there is. I started journaling during those weeks, filling up pages with questions more than answers. What do I actually need from friendship? What have I been afraid of? What do I want the rest of my life to look like, and who do I want in it, and what kind of friend do I want to be, not just have? I realized I had been operating from a deep foundational fear that I was too much for people, too needy, too intense, too heavy, that if I let people see the full weight of me, they'd do the math and decide I wasn't worth it. That fear had been so loud for so long that I'd let it run my relationships. I'd shrunk myself preemptively before anyone could ask me to avoid the possibility of rejection. And in doing so, here's the part that genuinely broke me open. I had actually made myself less visible, less known, less truly loved. Because how can someone love the full version of you if you've been carefully hiding the full version of you? Layla didn't know me completely. She knew the curated version, the easygoing version, the one who didn't need much and didn't ask for much and didn't make things complicated. She'd grown away from that asterisk version, which was fair, because that version was never the whole truth. What might have happened if she'd known the whole truth? I didn't know, I still don't entirely. But I was starting to think that finding out might matter more than protecting myself from the answer. There's a particular kind of growth that can only happen alone. Not lonely growth, not the kind that comes from isolation and spiraling inward, but the kind that requires you to stop looking to another person to tell you who you are, to stop measuring your worth through their eyes, To sit with yourself long enough that you stop flinching at your own reflection. I won't pretend those weeks were beautiful. They weren't. They were uncomfortable and slow and full of moments where I genuinely couldn't tell if I was doing something healthy or just disappearing into my own head. But some things came clear. I learned that I had made Layla responsible for something she hadn't agreed to carry, the full weight of my sense of belonging. When one person becomes your whole person, the architecture of your emotional life becomes dangerously narrow. One relationship, no matter how deep and genuine, cannot hold the entire edifice of a person's need for connection. That's not a reflection on the relationship. It's just the physics of being human. I had other people in my life. I'd just been treating them as secondary, as supporting cast, because I'd already decided that Layla was the main relationship, the real one. I'd shortchanged myself and I'd shortchanged them. I thought about a girl I'd been distantly friendly with for 2 years, a coworker named Priya who always made me laugh and had once, offhandedly, said we should get coffee sometime, and I'd smiled and said yes and then never followed through because, I think if I'm honest, I was afraid of wanting a new friendship when the one I had was already so uncertain. Like I couldn't afford to need anyone else. I called Priya. We got coffee, and then we got coffee again, and then dinner. And somewhere in the course of those simple, ordinary hours, something started to grow different from what Layla and I had, not better or worse, just genuinely its own thing, new and uncertain and full of the particular pleasure of discovering someone. I was still afraid, but I was afraid and doing it anyway, which I was beginning to understand was the only way to do it. I also, and this is harder to admit, started going to therapy. I'd thought about it for years. I'd recommended it to other people freely, enthusiastically, with zero judgment. And somehow I'd never managed to make the appointment for myself because that felt like admitting something, confirming something, and I was very good at not confirming things I didn't want to look at. My therapist's name was Dr. Okonkwo. She was warm and direct in equal measure, which turned out to be exactly what I needed from a therapist in the same way it turned out to be what I needed from a friend. She did not let me wander around in circles avoiding my own point. She asked careful, precise questions and then waited for the real answer, not the first answer, which is a different thing. She asked me in our third session who I was when I wasn't being someone's friend. I sat with that question for a long time. And then I said, I don't entirely know. She nodded like that was exactly what she'd expected me to say. We spent a lot of time on that question, on the version of me that had a self independent of relationships, on what I liked when I wasn't performing likability, on what scared me that had nothing to do with anyone else's opinion of me, on the small, stubborn desires I'd been pushing aside for years because they didn't fit the role I'd cast myself in. I'd wanted to write, not professionally, not necessarily just to write for the pleasure of it, for the way it organized the noise inside me into something that made sense. I told myself I wasn't good enough, that it didn't matter, that there were more practical things to spend my time on. I started writing. These are connected things, I think. Letting yourself be more is connected to letting yourself want more, to claiming more space in friendships, in your own head, in the simple daily texture of your life. I was getting bigger, the scared, preemptive smallness was loosening its grip. 3 months passed. Layla and I texted throughout, not as often as before but regularly. Plans vaguely made and not quite followed through on, the surface of our friendship maintained. I hadn't said anything about what I'd heard. I'd thought about it endlessly. I drafted things in my journal, long letters I never sent, versions of the conversation we might have. My therapist had gently, consistently encouraged me to think about whether I wanted to have the conversation, not whether I was required to, but whether I needed it. Whether not having it was a choice I was making consciously or a choice I was making out of that same old fear. That's the thing about good therapy. It doesn't tell you what to do, it removes the hiding places so you have to actually decide. I decided to tell her. Not because I wanted to have it out with her. Not because I was angry anymore, that had softened, in the way that feelings do when you tend to them instead of suppressing them, but because I had spent 11 years not saying the true things and I was done with that. I was done swallowing the truths that belonged in the air between us. Whatever happened next, I wanted there to have been honesty, at least once, at least that. We met at the same coffee shop we'd been going to since high school. A slightly run-down place with mismatched chairs and a barista who always recognized us, who'd watched us grow up through a series of increasingly serious conversations at the corner table. It felt right to do it there. She looked happy when she walked in. And then she looked at my face and some of that relaxed into wariness. She knew me, even now she knew me. "Something's up," she said before she'd even sat down. "Yeah," I said, "something's up." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and looked at me steadily. That was one of the things I'd always loved about her. She didn't flinch from things, she faced them even when it was hard. "Okay," she said, "tell me." And I told her. I kept it simple. I didn't read from a script or deliver a speech. I just said, 3 months ago when I stayed over, I wasn't fully asleep when you were on the phone with Dominic. I heard what you said about me." The color left her face. For a long moment, she didn't say anything at all. She looked down at her cup. I watched 100 different things move across her face: shame, fear, something that looked almost like relief. "Oh," she said finally. Her voice was very small. "Yeah." Another silence. "How much did you hear?" "Enough." She closed her eyes. "I'm so sorry, that wasn't," she started again. "I don't want to make excuses, I'm just so sorry. I know you didn't mean for me to hear it. That doesn't make it okay." "No," I agreed, "it doesn't." She opened her eyes and they were wet. I'd seen Layla cry many times. She was a crier, which was one of the things I loved about her, that she didn't hold it back. But this was a different kind of crying. This was the kind that comes from being seen in a moment you didn't choose to be seen. "I feel terrible," she whispered. "I know," I paused, "but I didn't come here to make you feel worse. I came because I needed you to know that I heard it, and I needed to say something about it because I've been not saying things for years and I'm trying to stop doing that." She looked at me, really looked at me, the way she used to when we were teenagers and everything was more naked and unguarded. "What did you need to say?" she asked. And I told her the rest. I told her that she wasn't wrong, that I had been holding on too tight, that I'd made her carry more than she'd agreed to in silence without ever telling her what I was actually feeling or needing, and that wasn't fair to either of us. I told her I was sorry for that, genuinely, not strategically. It was my real sorry. And I told her the part that was harder. I told her that being called a lot by the person who was supposed to know me best, who was supposed to be safe, had cracked something open in me. And I didn't say it to wound her. I said it because it was true, and because the truth mattered more to me now than protecting her from the impact of her own words. "I've spent my whole life trying to make myself smaller," I said, "because I was afraid of being too much. I was afraid that if people saw the full size of my feelings, they'd leave. And I did that with you, the person I was closest to. I hid the most real parts of myself from you because I was afraid you couldn't handle them. And then you said I was a lot, even though you'd never actually seen the full version of me." She was fully crying now, quietly, just tears moving down her face without effort. "That's," she stopped, "that breaks my heart." "It broke mine a little too," I said, "but I think it also needed to break." We talked for almost 3 hours that afternoon. Not in circles, in spirals, the way real conversations go when they're working their way towards something true. We talked about the distance between us, how we both felt it and neither of us had said anything. We talked about how she'd been changing and felt guilty about it, like growing away from who she'd been was somehow a betrayal of me and everything we'd built. She'd been carrying that guilt around without ever examining whether it was well-founded, just the weight of it in her chest every time she thought of me. "I should have told you," she said. "Instead of telling Dominic, I should have talked to you." "Yes," I said, "and I should have told you what I needed instead of waiting for you to guess." We were both guilty of the same cowardice, in different costumes. She talked about the stuffed elephant, the thing she'd laughed at that had hurt me more than almost anything else. She cried harder when we got there. "It wasn't meant cruelly," she said. "I know that doesn't fix it, but I was trying to, I don't know, show Dominic who you were to me, that you're this person who still has these parts of herself that aren't polished or curated, this lovely innocent part that still sleeps with a stuffed animal. I was showing him why I love you." She shook her head, and it came out like a punchline. "I hate that." I thought about that for a long time. I thought about how the same thing can look so different depending on where you're standing when you see it. How something meant as tenderness can land as ridicule depending on context, tone, the 3 in the morning darkness, and a person lying on a sleeping bag pretending to be asleep. "I believe you," I said, and I did. I want to be careful here because this is the part where stories like mine tend to go one of two ways. Either the friendship is magically repaired and everything is beautiful, or it completely falls apart and the narrator learns a lesson and moves on. Life is rarely that clean. Here is what actually happened. Layla and I didn't instantly go back to what we were. The conversation cracked things open in a way that needed tending, carefully, slowly, with a lot of honesty we hadn't been used to practicing with each other. There were more awkward conversations, moments of regression, times when we fell back into old patterns and had to gently pull each other out again. She started being more honest with me about when she was struggling, not performing fine when she wasn't. That was harder for her than it sounds. She'd built a lot of her identity around being the capable, together one, and letting me see the mess underneath took real courage. I started telling her what I actually needed. Not everything all at once, not a flood, but in ordinary daily ways I started speaking up. I need you to reschedule when you cancel. I miss you and I want to actually see you, not just make plans that don't happen. When you didn't respond to what I told you about my family thing, I felt like it didn't matter to you. Those small acts of saying the thing after a lifetime of swallowing it felt enormous. And she heard them, she tried. Our friendship looked different than it had before. Less certain in some ways, more conscious of its own fragility, more deliberate in tending to itself, but more honest, more real, more like a relationship between two fully known people and less like a history between two people who'd agreed not to look too closely. I don't know if we'll be close when we're 40 the way I always imagined. I genuinely don't know. Some things once named change the shape of what they're in. You can't unknow things, you can only decide what to do with the knowing. But I know that what we have now is more true than what we had before. And I know that I would rather have a true, imperfect, conscious friendship than a comfortable, performed closeness that's really just two people protecting each other from the full size of themselves. Here is the thing that changed most. May. Not in a dramatic, overnight kind of way, not in a way anyone watching from the outside might notice immediately, but in the quiet, foundational kind of way that changes how you relate to everything. I stopped trying to be less. I stopped preemptively making myself smaller to avoid taking up too much space. I stopped performing low maintenance when what I actually needed was care. I started saying things out loud, needs, fears, wants, observations in ordinary amounts to ordinary people without bracing for the impact. Some people loved me more for it, some drifted. That's how it works. Not everyone is meant to love you at full size, and that's okay. The right people will. I found some of those people, new ones and also old ones I hadn't been fully honest with before. I found out what it felt like to be known, actually known by someone, and to know them back, and to have the friendship rest on real ground instead of careful performance. And the stuffed elephant, it's still on my bed. I'm not embarrassed about it anymore. It's part of the full version of me, and the full version of me is the only version worth being. I'm telling you this story because I know I'm not the only person who has lived some version of it. Maybe your version doesn't involve a sleepover or an overheard phone call. Maybe yours is quieter or louder or shaped differently. But I'd be willing to bet that if you've listened this long, some part of this has found a home in you somewhere. So here is what I want to say to you directly. If you are making yourself smaller to protect a relationship, asterisk. Stop, not cruelly, not all at once, not without care for the other person, but stop. Because what you're protecting isn't really the relationship, it's the fear of losing the relationship. And those are different things. Real relationships can hold more of you than you're showing them. If they can't, that's important information. Better to know it than to spend years in a version of closeness that's actually just mutual performance. If you have been afraid of being too much, asterisk. Someone once told you or showed you or allowed you to believe that you were more than they could hold. Maybe it was true of that person in that moment. It is not a universal law. It is not the permanent shape of your worth. The right people, the truly right ones, will not find your full size overwhelming. They'll meet it. They'll expand to hold it. They will say there you are when you show them the truest parts of yourself. If you have someone in your life who carries this fear, asterisk. Say it plainly. Tell them they're not too much. Not once, not in a grand gesture, plainly, regularly, in the small moments. People who have been told in 1,000 direct and indirect ways that their needs are a burden do not heal from that with a single reassurance. They need to be shown repeatedly and simply that there is room for them. If you overheard something that broke you, let it break you a little. Not forever. Grief has a season and you don't have to live in it, but let it break the parts that needed breaking. The protective shell, the performance, the comfortable arrangement that was keeping you from growing into the next version of yourself. Sometimes the crack is where the light gets in, and sometimes the light is hard and clarifying and not at all gentle, and it is still light. And if you are the person who said the thing, who spoke someone's truth before they were ready to hear it, who laughed at something that mattered, who named someone's weight without meaning to crush them with it, I want you to hear this. You are also human. You are also carrying things you don't know how to put down. You are also just trying to figure out who you are and what you need and how to love people well while also loving yourself well, which is genuinely one of the hardest things there is. Give yourself the same grace you'd give anyone else. And then, if the relationship matters, be honest. Say it plainly. Don't defend, don't deflect. Just say, I said something that wasn't fair and I'm sorry and I want to try again. That's enough, that's always enough to start. It's been over a year since that night on Layla's floor. I'm still in therapy, which still surprises people when I tell them, as if I've graduated from needing it. I haven't. I don't think I want to. It's one of the most useful things I do, this regular practice of turning toward myself with honesty and care. I'm writing, which still terrifies me every time and still matters more than almost anything else I do. I wrote this story, and that alone tells you something about where I've ended up. I have a small, deliberate circle of people I love and am loved by. It's not large, it's real. Layla and I are still friends. It's slower and more careful than it used to be, and also, I think, more honest. She came to my birthday last month and brought a card that said inside in her handwriting, "You were never too much. I just didn't know how to say so. I love you. I'm sorry it took me so long." I put it on my desk. I look at it sometimes. The cold stone that used to live in my chest, the one made of fear, of waiting, of making myself small and hopping, it was enough. It's not there anymore. Not in the same way. Things move through me differently now. There is more space. I'm rooted, yes, she was right about that. I am rooted to the people I love, to the places I've been, to the versions of myself I've been and grown through. But roots aren't the same as being stuck. Roots are what let you grow tall. I know that now. And maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. All of it. The cold floor, the closed but not quite closed door, the voice in the dark saying the hardest things in the world to hear. Maybe I needed to be broken open. Maybe some things can only start after something else ends. Not with a clean break, not with a door slamming, but with a crack, a small, quiet crack in the middle of the night that lets in just enough truth to change everything. Thank you for listening. If this story touched something in you, tell someone, not the whole story, just the part that matters. You never know who needs to hear it. And if you've been making yourself smaller, stop. Right now, start taking up your space. You were never too much, you were always exactly enough.